thank you very much for having me here today. It's fantastic at this point in time to to see accessibility getting such strong focus that we have our own track here, because this is actually my first chance to to get up and talk about EPUB 3, and it kind of set me thinking back 2 years ago to where I was and where we were from an accessibility perspective at that time. And if you told me 2 years ago when we were beginning the DAISY revision, we were starting a new XML authoring and interchange format, and we're getting ready to start the new digital talking book revision, that 2 years from now we wouldn't be doing a digital talking book revision anymore, and a mainstream format would be superseding the DAISY format, and not compromising in any way too. That I probably would have been in disbelief and said, no, accessibility can't move that fast. There can't be that kind of adoption that quickly. But here we are today, and I've got a great opportunity here to walk you through some of the new features that EPUB 3 introduces beyond what we've seen in the DAISY community and as well in the EPUB community. So to get started, I'm going to try not to to duplicate too much of what Sarah's talked about today, but there's some key points to be made here, and the digital famine is one of them. And as probably a lot of you know, the numbers commonly cited is that 5% of print publications are only ever made available to people with print disabilities at any given time. So actually what I have here is a little bit of an exaggeration. I've got a comparison of two sides, 2 books compared to 25 books that might be available to a sighted person, and it would actually probably be less than 2 books out of that number. So there's a real disparity that people with print disabilities face, and there's hope, there's a lot of promise in ebooks, but at the same time it requires work and it requires effort to make digital books accessible and to make content accessible. And so, even though we're making progress, there's still, as Sarah was saying, there's still much that needs to be done, and there's still much that needs to be, much effort that needs to be put into all kinds of channels, which I'll get to in a little bit. But when I was doing some background research on the accessibility book that I did for O'Reilly, I wanted to see if that number had changed at all. So I took a look around. I found some statistics from the RNIB that show some promise that we are starting to see the numbers tick up. At least in the UK, it's up to 7% now of print publications that are made available, and 54% of the top 1,000 books, in 2010 were in a format that was accessible to a person with a print disability. So there is progress being made. It's, on the flip side of the coin is, 54% of the top 1,000, that's general fiction. So it's a lot of the easy content that people can translate. It's the paragraphs and headings. And so, I don't want to overstate, where we are, but at the same time, there's a lot of good work being done right now. And as, Sarah was mentioning in her presentation, accessibility, it's not just a hard thing to define in terms of, how do you make content accessible for somebody? What is accessibility from an ebook perspective? It depends on what your, what issues you have with the print document. It's and even beyond that, it comes down to, how do we produce these books? What's in the formats? How do people purchase the content? How do they get the content? Is your provisioning interface accessible? Can somebody go to your bookstore and find an accessible ebook? Can they purchase the accessible ebook? Are the reading systems themselves accessible? Can somebody have voice commands? Or is it just going to be a blank slate? They get the book on the device and they can't do anything with it. And even, it goes right down to the accessive technologies themselves. People don't think about that. They think about the accessive technology being what is assisting somebody, but a lot of people have older ATs, and they don't necessarily work with the newer standards that are being developed. So there's all kinds of barriers. When you have a cloud reader, for example, you might have an older version of JAWS that can't handle the HTML5 tagging. So it's not just the format. It's not just here's an accessible EPUB 3 format that you can, you know, enhance, put all your good work into. There's still other issues that have to be solved as well. But obviously, I can't go into all of that today, and I'm not going to try. I'm going to focus, you know, primarily on EPUB 3 here and how that can help, you know, alleviate some of the issues that we're facing. And of course, as Sarah was saying, you know, print disabilities, dyslexia, you know, cognitive disabilities, you know, physical disabilities, inability to hold, you know, not books, but reading devices. You know, it spans across. It's not just a print disability. These issues also are reflected in the usability of our reading devices. And again, as we're going digital and as EPUB 3 becomes more multimedia, you know, you have to consider that when you start adding audio and video content, you know, you have a potential to exclude a whole other segment of the population as well. So, you know, there's a lot to consider when you're looking at your digital content here. And again, as you know, I don't want to belabor this point as well, but you know, Sarah gave some of the numbers. 1 in 10 people face a print disability, and that number increases as you age. You know, it's the EU research here that I pointed out that 21% of people over the age of 50, you know, begin to experience severe vision, hearing, and dexterity problems. So, you know, there's a large market of people, you know, who can benefit from accessible content. It's not a niche need that, you know, only a small segment of the content or a small segment of the population can benefit from. And here's you know, just some numbers of how large that can be. You know, worldwide, the growth is much bigger than in Canada. So you're looking at, you know, over the next 40 years, growth from 300 million almost to 660 million, and even trying to extrapolate some of that data from Statistics Canada, just to give a perspective for Canada. We have, you know, 2 million adults over 50 who can benefit from accessible ebooks. And the other thing, and sort of the point I prefer to make in this, is that it's not just about a disability. It's everybody can have situational disabilities. Everybody can have, you know, the temporary inability to interact with their content in their preferred way. You know, it can be glare from being outside. It can be, you know, having too small a screen, you know, trying to read on your cell phone. It can be noise or, you know, motion that causes you not to be able to read on an airplane or a bus or a subway. So there's always reasons why, you know, having that flexibility, the ability to jump from text to audio, for example, is beneficial to all. You know, and people sometimes even forget that it's quite prevalent now too. You know, you go to a bar and there's the sports screen, and what's underneath it, it's captioning so that you can read what's going on the television. You know, that technology is out there and people benefit from it, you know, regardless of abilities. So, but really, you know, obviously I'm here to talk about EPUB 3. So a quick little background on the IDPF. This is the organization that maintains the standards. 250 members, probably most of you, if you're in publishing, you know of them or belong to them. Obviously their core focus is the EPUB specification, and we just did the revision last year. A little timeline. It actually goes back, obviously there's no EPUB 1. It was the Open eBook publication specification back in 1999. EPUB's not a new standard. It's been around a long time, but you know, some of the key achievements are, you know, the fact you've got pretty much, you know, most of the world using this format at this time. It's adopted the world over. Even, you know, when it comes to somebody like Amazon who's not using the EPUB format, it's ingesting EPUBs from publishers at this time. So, you know, it really is the global standard at this time. Again, last year we standardized EPUB 3. This year it's sort of the year of the reader. We're looking to see, you know, the Readium project. If you were at TOC, it was announced there. That's the project that the IDPF itself is undertaking to begin, you know, facilitating the adoption and development of EPUB 3 reading systems. Apple, you know, had their announcement. They've got their own sort of spin-off, but with their iBooks format at the moment. But kind of hoping that that will, fold back into EPUB as well. But there's, again, it's, even though it's a proprietary format, it's got a lot of the features and a lot of the accessibility functionality right now that EPUB 3 offers, with the media overlays and some other things that we'll get to as we go along. The DAISY Consortium, again, Sarah kind of touched on them as well. This is a not-for-profit organization of libraries for the blind, CNIB, who we used to work for. They produce the DAISY files at the moment. Founded in 1996, it was the time when they were going analog to digital, and it was an attempt to, develop a format that was specialized for people with print disabilities to ensure that they had access to content. And it's not, I mean, in fairness to what Sarah said, it's not widely known or adopted at this time. It's it really is libraries for the blind who are producing in this format. But that's not to take anything away from it either. It's a fully accessible format for people. And what kind of happened is EPUB 3 and DAISY sort of came together back in 2010 when as I mentioned, I was working on the XML format, and we were starting to gear up for a digital talking book, and then rumblings sort of began at that point in time to, that the IDPF was really looking, to expand. There'd been a bit of DAISY content and DAISY functionality included in version 2, the NCX file for navigation, and and people don't realize DT Book was actually a content option at that time, but you could create DT Book files in your EPUB. And there's, obviously some hesitancy, what would happen, what would really, be included in the EPUB 3 revision. But, as the summer went on after EPUB 2, was put out, it really kind of, people got excited that, nobody was going to compromise in the final product that we were going to develop. And this is what, the table that I have up here now is just showing some of the features that, you get better structure now in EPUB 3. There's the HTML5 expanded element set. DT Book is similar to HTML5. It had a lot of expanded elements as well, but it was completely missing semantics, which is a key piece of the puzzle. You've got the Smile text and audio synchronization in a cleaner format in EPUB 3 from what's been done in DAISY. You get video. Navigation isn't new. I'll get to some of these in more detail as we go along. But really, I just want to highlight here, you see some of the reds of the features that were missing previously, and nothing's missing in EPUB 3. EPUB 3 really, as it said, is a superset of DAISY at this point. So you've got two long-standing specifications, one, accessibility one and one mainstream one, and you've really kind of got that meshing of them together now in EPUB 3. So there's huge potential for making accessible content, but there's still challenges, and that's what I want to try to move into now is we'll take a look at some of the features, and there's no math to this pie chart. It's just it tries to give a sense that there's a whole, there's an ideal, as Sarah was mentioning, of perfect accessibility and all the things you could do and all the things you can include. And you don't, I don't want to say you don't have to include them, but even if you can get some of the core features in, even if you can do your text, your structure and semantics, and you can have rich navigation, you're going a long way to being able to provide, that accessible reading experience for a large number of your readers. That's kind of a core that you sort of need to strive for as you move forward. But then again, there's so much more here that you can do with EPUB 3 than just text and navigation. So structure and semantics. I'm a data guy. I'm kind of the geek. I love the XML specifications. I love kind of developing. This is more where I come from in my background, and so I always try to sort of push and enforce and sort of nudge people that if you're not taking care of your data, you don't expect it to do anything for you. You know, you're not going to get quality. People sort of think the magic starts with their iPad. You know, iPad can do all these things. You know, I just load a book into it and it'll work perfectly. And it's not true. It's really what is underneath your content. You know, without that core, you can't really do these things. You know, it's just data to the reading system. And HTML5, that's the core EPUB 3 text markup grammar. You know, we've got now new sectioning elements, asides, articles, grouping, multimedia, audio, video, canvas. All of these things, you know, enhance in a way that makes the books more accessible than they have been in the past. You might say, oh, well, you could include objects or you could include figures before, but without the elements, without those semantics and structure, they don't mean anything, you know, ultimately when it gets to the reading device. And sort of a quick example here of what I mean by this is, you know, I've got a sort of deliberately blurred textbook page for you to look at. And, you know, for a sighted reader, you can see that on the left-hand page, you've got two figures, there's a caption, it's got some slight, you know, coloration in the background. On the right-hand side of the page, there's some sort of an aside or a little embedded article that's in there. That's great. You know, when you want to read the, you know, the actual primary narrative, you just follow along the content that, you know, is in plain white background. It's easy to see. There's no issue. What happens when you put it in a reading device, you know, HTML4, maybe you stick divs around these, you know, to try to group them, maybe put a class on it to give it a little bit of background shading, but that doesn't help the reading system at all. You know, it doesn't tell it anything. It has to read through it. It can't skip by. It doesn't know what you mean with when you just stick a div on something. It's just content to it. It's just a grouping tag. So, you know, just to give a quick example here, you know, with HTML5, we could stick figure tags around our two figures. You know, we can go and put an aside around the little separate bar that's on the lower side. And now when somebody has an accessible reading device, they can come in here and say, you know what, I only want the primary narrative. I don't care about figures. I don't care about asides. And from a reading system perspective, it can take them out for them, and it can give them the logical reading order. They don't have to manually skip through and find out where they're going. You know, again, it's data driven. If your data is weak, they have to navigate through manually. If your data is strong and you know, well developed, I guess you want to call it, then, you know, these sorts of possibilities are endless, right? You can take page numbers out. You can, you know, you mark up your footnotes. All of these interferences that you know, really impede people's ability to read content can be taken out, if so long as you're properly tagging and maintaining your data. Another of the advantages of adopting HTML5 is that we're getting MathML support in our content documents now. No more figures, hopefully. You know, again, this is one of those things where just because it's there, you know, people can still do bad practices, but, you know, hopefully, you know, by pushing this and making people aware and helping people understand that if you have math content, math equations can then be voiced for the readers. It's not something that you leave to, maybe they describe the image, maybe they describe the image incorrectly. You know, not everybody has a background in how to properly describe these sorts of features, and it's very difficult, and it may not be something that you have in-house, but you can write equations. If your author is creating equations, they should know how to write equations. There's plugins for Word. There's ways of creating MathML that can work into your workflow. And the other big one is SVG. It's now, you know, a first-class citizen in EPUB. One of the key features here, again, is if you're doing zooming with vector graphics, they scale well. It's not like a raster image, which pixelates and becomes just a big mess like our tiger here from the W3 SVG accessibility guidelines, just to give you a sample of what it means to somebody. But you also get embedded accessibility in SVG. You can put your title in, you can put a description in. You know, there are ways to now enhance this content. And at the same time, there's also sort of an ongoing issue with the fact that you can use SVG basically to do, sort of final form pages, right? You could do manga, you could do comics in SVG. How do you translate that into something meaningful for, a reader who can't see the images? In turn, that turns to, novelization or serialization into another form. And that's something that EPUB allows at the moment. You can embed, two different types an XHTML and an SVG version of your document. But there's, at the moment, I'll just say that there's an ongoing group that's looking at how to switch, how to make the user aware that there are those options available. So it's these sorts of issues are open, but at the same time, it's all of this stuff is very key and very core to the IDPF. They're looking for solutions to these and working with people to make sure that we get the optimal solution, both for for the mainstream publishers and for the accessibility community. One of the other problems, and this isn't something necessarily, isolated to EPUB 3, but is HTML5. There's issues right now around the long desk and finding an alternate or option to how you put in out-of-band descriptions. At the moment, there's a lot of advocacy work being done to have long desk reinstated. As of right now, my understanding is it's not in the specification, although there's a pending open issue with it to determine whether or not to keep it out or whether to possibly re-adopt it. So that kind of complicates things for EPUB. There's also talk about an ARIA described at. Right now there's ARIA described by, which allows you to do inter-document or intra, I guess it has to be embedded in the content somewhere, the description. You can't link to it externally to your files. So, we're kind of hoping to get it into ARIA. There's talk of an ARIA described at, which would be an out-of-bound version or out-of-band version for doing descriptions. But again, ARIA's, I think it's final recommendation at the moment, so it still has to be completely finalized, and then a 1.1 revision would probably have to bring that in. So there's talk, it's stemming out of some of the diagram work that I'll mention in a second, to potentially put in an EPUB described at replacement, at least temporarily, to give that functionality so that you can do out-of-band descriptions in the moment. And diagram, sort of as I mentioned at the start, is something I've also been involved in. It's a U.S. Department of Education initiative to provide a standardized way of describing images. So it's not just a single text format at the end of the link. It would be its own XML content model in which you could provide summaries, long descriptions, simplified descriptions. You could embed tactile images with it, simplified images, as alternates to the main form. But that's still, this work's ongoing at the moment. I can't give you a timeline on when that will be finalized or ready for production use. But diagramcenter.org, that they've got all the information up there right now if you're interested in finding out more about it. One of the other keys, as I was saying, for your core accessibility is the EPUB navigation document. And one of the, navigation isn't new to EPUB 3. There's, the NCX was in EPUB 2, but the NCX, which came over from the DAISY specification, the DAISY world, it was inflexible, as I'll get to in a second. And it was also, it's a custom XML format. And what Marcus Gilling, the CTO of DAISY and IDPF, really was responsible for was reformulating this as an XHTML content document, which makes it, it brings up the accessibility level even of your navigation. You can now, you can put Ruby in your navigation document, which you couldn't do before. You've got the internationalization features available to you. You can put in alternate text representations. You can put a title on your links if there's problems, if you have math or if you have symbols that can't be pronounced. There's all these additions that come with having an actual HTML5 document as your navigation document. And there's two perspectives. I mean, one is the navigation document is something that the reading system can take out and do whatever it wants with. That's the sort of, you'll hear it called like a declarative a table of contents. It means here's the data, take it, use it how you want, present it to the user how you want. But there's also, by being an XHTML5 content document, it means you can embed this right into your document at the same time. It's no longer create an NCX, create a version that goes with your content. You can now use the same document for both purposes as well. And again, just a sort of my quick little low-tech example on how to tailor navigation here. Typically, fiction, some nonfiction, anything that has just simple parts, chapters, you're not going to get deeply nested TOCs. You're not going to have to worry about line wrapping. You're not going to have to worry what happens, when you hit the edge of the page. But when you get to textbooks and complicated, manuals and STM publishing, things like that, you start getting all of these levels of heading, and the problem then becomes, or the problem has been in the past with the NCX, is that you couldn't tailor the view to the user. You had to either give them everything or you had to pull out sections of it, and then you sort of take away the accessibility of your NCX by pulling out the structure. Then somebody can't navigate to all of the levels through the NCX because they're not there, right? You had to make that decision. There wasn't an ability to style it or do anything meaningful with the content but strip it out. And this is what EPUB 3, by adding the hidden attribute in HTML5, you can actually put this on the lists within your navigation document, so that you can say to the reading system, this is something that I want you to visually present, but this is something I still is important and key to the user or the reader being able to navigate, but don't show it to the sighted readers. Keep it out because it's going to clutter up the visual display for people. And so of course then it's gone, but at the same time it's still there. You have a visual view and you have the AT view, which can still go down through all of the various levels. Audio and video, those are the two big sexy ones that people are kind of eager to get at and start using, and I can understand why. And I'm not here to say don't use them. It's actually an improvement now. With the audio and video elements in HTML5, we now have native controls in browsers and as reading systems get developed as well. I kind of pulled out a little piece of content from one of the samples that we have for EPUB 3 in the Readium, just to give a quick view that you can go in and access these by the keyboard. It's not like Flash and all the various wonderful movie and audio and video players that trap people and don't let them out and don't give control over and force sounds to the highest level and don't let you reduce them. It really does, you sort of have to remember to start with the basics, right? If in your audio and video, make sure you enable the controls by default. Don't take them out. Even if you're going to go off and make your own, skin it your own way, create your own controls, if you leave these controls on by default, take them out by JavaScript, then it's accessible for people who don't have JavaScript enabled devices, who don't have the ability to interact in that way. The other feature of audio and video, which isn't actually supported at this time, but it's going to be coming, is the ability to include time tracks. So instead of having to embed your closed captions inside the video format, which you have to do right now, there will be an ability to include these as a separate text file, as a special format that can be used to render the captions with it. So something to look forward to, again, as browser cores evolve and as the specifications get implemented. These features are going to be available to enhance your audio and video content. Media overlays, this is another one that I gather has a lot of appeal for publishers as well. This is the the bouncing ball, as people like to call it, or the synchronized text and audio components. So this is what enables the different modalities, and this is what enables you to provide a book that or even just to individualize your product to a point where you could have text only, audio and text, all these kinds of variations on it, and this is what allows people to interact with the content in the way they choose. So if somebody is sitting on a bus and is getting nauseous, they don't have to sit and try to read or shut it off and give up for the day. They can flip to an audio playback, listen to it until they get home, flip back, start reading again. It's the ability to choose, that EPUB offers, this flexibility in how you interact with your content that's really so key to and so great to see in a mainstream format. Text-to-speech. A lot of people think of text-to-speech as something that's just in the reading system. You turn it on, it's available to you or not. EPUB 3, and by extension H205, you have access to PLS, SSML, and CSS3 speech. Each of these is a means of enhancing the quality of the rendering of the text-to-speech engine. So PLS is the pronunciation lexicon specification. It's kind of like a big global lookup for defining proper names. The words that don't change based on the context in which they're used is one of the primary. But any word that's sort of commonly used, or you decide is the main or key pronunciation, you can build lexicons that are then used in place so that the rendering engine doesn't just try to guess or use whatever intrinsic rules it has to come up with the rendering. SSML, that's going a level deeper. That's getting into your markup, and that's you can actually tag into your text and override even if it's something that's in your PLS, or just specifically define. A lot of TTS engines have trouble with numbers and or just even words like I think in the book I put bass and bass. It's not going to know in any given context which one to use. You can't rely on like verb placement or noun placement, things like that. They're not useful. So SSML is that sort of finer grain control that you can then have over your document. And CSS3 speech, it's kind of a handy little tool. It simplifies things like when to spell out acronyms, or when to try to pronounce them as a word. You can have that control and say, no, don't spell out or don't pronounce this number as 911. Say do 911. It gives you that kind of control. It's not about the pronunciation so much as it is about controlling aspects of the TTS engine as well. So it gives you the ability to add audio cues. It can change voices. You could, if the reader had a male and a female voice, you could sort of give them some flavor and play around a bit with what comes out. So you can give them some variety rather than kind of listening to a monotone voice the whole time that they're reading. And of course, lexicons can be reused. That's the great thing about them. That's something that we've done at CNIB as well. Not parcel them out necessarily for ebook distribution, but you can build one big central lexicon and then parcel that out per book depending on which words are in it. So over time, as your lexicon grows, then the cost of maintaining it and the cost of enhancing it diminishes as you go. And text-to-speech too, it also offers the same sort of visual fun of like the media overlays. It can give you, like the example here is this Astra B reading system, which will attempt to highlight the entire sentence, or in this case a heading, and then actually shows word by word highlighting as it's sped through to the text-to-speech engine. So there's an extra level even beyond what's available with the media overlays, because you can't do that. Media overlays, it's a certain synchronization level, whether it's word level, sentence level, whatever you pick. is all that's provided to you at that time. Whereas, you know, with this sort of, you know, scripted or you know, reading system feature, you know, depending on what it has available, these are the kinds of nice little things that it can do to enhance the playback. Web accessibility, that's a big one. You know, you've got all kinds of challenges, the same challenges that have existed on the web for years now have sort of made their way into EPUB as well. So you have to be aware when you go in and create your content that you're not taking it away from people by default. You can't script. I mean, this is the idea of progressive enhancement, is that you don't mess with the core text of your document. You know, it should always be accessible to readers. And this is actually codified in, you know, EPUB 3. It's not something that we sort of suggest you should do, but it is actually one of the requirements that you not alter, you know, the default reading order. I don't want to descend too much into the web issues at this time. I just want to say that, you know, web content accessibility guidelines 2.0, if you're doing scripted controls, scripted forms, the Y-ARIA as well. You know, these are skills too. I mean, the great thing is these are skills that lots of people have. This is you know, web developer skills. It's not something specialized you need. They should be versed in these technologies and be able to you know, to help you out in creating your content. The accessibility metadata, I'll kind of skim by that one too, because I know Sarah was dealing with it. It's, again, the great thing for EPUB 3 though is you can embed your ONIX records in your ebook. So this accessibility metadata doesn't just go into the distribution channel, you know, as an only means of finding it. It actually can carry with the book however the user, you know, comes across it or discovers it. So that information is always in the book so that they are aware of what features are available to them. And I guess, yeah, finally, I'll just kind of wrap up, and, you know, just topical for this audience, I guess, is the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disability Act, which requires, you know, formats and communication to be accessible. And the key point here is that EPUB is not just about books. I know we focus on publishing, and it's so central to getting, you know, getting books and getting publishing accessible for people, but it's a general document format as well. And this is something that when you're looking at being compliant with AODA, here's a format, you know, moving forward as reading systems come out, that can be, you know, they can be used for both audiences. You know, it's not something that has to be done specially for a disability community. So yeah, I'll just wrap up. I mean, I got the little picture of the reading system here in Paradise, but, you know, my point is that we're not there, actually. You know, it seems nice, it's great, there's so much potential, but we've really got to work to, you know, to get publishing to shift the way that we're producing content and the way that, you know, the way that we're creating the reading systems. To, you know, there's still, you know, I don't want to get tongue-tied. It's there, it's on the horizon. We have the ability to provide in a mainstream format full accessibility. We just have to go out and do it now. And that's really what I want to leave you people with, is just, you know, do what you can, advocate, you know, push tool vendors to create accessible tools and better tools to produce content, because unless you do, it's sort of a, you know, an uphill battle for like the DAISY Consortium and people to try to, you know, to do this. So yeah, a few little things, resources. The IDPF has forums. There's an accessibility forum. If you want information, you don't know, you aren't sure if you're producing something, there's always, you can ask questions. The samples, Google project was recently started. I think TOC, it was announced as well. All kinds of great examples on good coding practices and you know, what you should be doing. And EPUB Check is our validation tool for EPUBs, which you should always be running and always ensuring that your data is valid. Otherwise, you run the risk of breaking ATs. They won't work if your data is broken. And I guess too, if you're looking for more information, yes, kind of mentioned at the start, what is EPUB 3 is one. This one's a little more technical. It really delves into the format and the specifications, and the Accessible EPUB 3 is, kind of wide-ranging, going into all of these issues, all of the tagging issues in detail too. So, yeah. If anybody has any questions or...
Just one, really. I noticed when you had the SVG up there, you had a document description that, could be fed in so someone could find out what's in that image.
Yep.
Can the same apply to the canvas element, which I know is a big, strong
Canvas element, yeah, I was going to put that in for today, and I just didn't know if I wanted to go. It's kind of a black hole. It's really hard. Actually, there's more on that in the accessibility book. It's free too. Both of those O'Reilly pieces you don't have to pay for.
Yeah, I've got one of them. But
yeah,
okay.
Yeah. It's just there's not a lot there. That's something that's being developed right now too in W3C, is a sort of the shadowed DOM and ways to hook into the canvas element to make it more accessible. But at the moment, you really have to provide like text alternatives to the canvas element.
Yeah, because I know, you can put in a placeholder for canvas if you have a device or a browser that doesn't support it. But almost everything's going that way now, so it would support it, so you'd end up having it. So I was just curious. But thanks.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah. Anybody else? No?